Righty. Cool. So this afternoon session is again brought to you complimentary as a result of the Employer of Choice Assist program, and that's supported by the Tasmanian Government through the Department of State Growth and Jobs Tasmania. For those of you I don't know, my name is Stacey Joseph. I'm the Business Services Manager and also running this project, which is great because we can provide all of these great little sessions at no cost. The goal is that you get a few things that you can take away. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about flexible working arrangements in the context of becoming an employer of choice. So that's one of the primary criteria in the Employer of Choice recognition program. But also, there's a lot in the Fair Work Act and modern awards around flexible working arrangements and our obligations as employers when somebody makes a request for a flexible working arrangement. So we'll sort of have a bit of a cultural piece, but we'll also talk about it a little bit from a compliance perspective as well. So we'll have a look at employer obligations, how we can manage flexible working arrangements, and I guess some ideas and thoughts around how we might facilitate more flexibility in the workplace. Flexible working arrangements have some connotations and some people have views around what it is, but there's a lot of different ways in which we can provide flexibility that don't necessarily mean just giving people time off or people working from home. So I guess that's the first thing to talk about is what does flexible working arrangements actually mean? And broadly, it is where an employee and an employer agree to change the stock standard working arrangements. And I think in the last 10 years, and probably even more since COVID, we've seen a real shift in employer attitudes towards providing flexibility. In part because we want our people to be happy and we want them to be able to find some balance between their work and personal life, but also just recognising that if we want to attract and retain good people, we might need to rethink what we consider to be, standard working arrangements, and recognising that not one solution works for everybody. So thinking about it in terms of each individual employee and what's going to work for them, but also how that might work for the business as well, because it's not sort of just giving people whatever they want and then hoping that they're going to be happy, because that's not really a sustainable approach. But also not making our first response when somebody's asking for some flexibility to be no. And it really depends on your philosophy of work. I know some people have a very traditional view of work and that I could never do that when I was in a role like that, so you can't do it, versus the I need to give people everything that they want so that they're happy and they don't leave. We kind of need to find a bit of a middle ground there. So there's a raft of different flexible working arrangements. Sorry for the copious amounts of dot points there, but I just wanted to get people thinking about it from broader than that working from home or just giving people time off. So where our business or our organisation can accommodate it, we could have some flexibility in start and finishing times. If you've got people, traditional example, needing to drop kids off at school or picking kids up from school. But it might also be around other things. Not everybody in our workplace has children or caring responsibilities. Maybe somebody wants to be able to go and do a PT class at the gym or something along those lines, and that's really good for their mental health and productivity. So perhaps they can start at 9:30 instead of 8:30 or whatever it might be. We're seeing a lot more of the compression of working hours. So if you follow HR sort of things, you'll see there are a lot of organisations moving to 4-day work weeks. Sometimes that means people work, 4 ordinary days. In other organisations, that means that people do longer days, but less of them. And depending on how front-facing your organisation is and how many people you've got to slot in and out, that might be something to consider looking at. And there's some really strong research around, those compressed working hours or less days of work per week actually seeing reduced absenteeism and increased productivity as a result of that. You might have full-time people that want to change or transition to part-time or casual. We're seeing a lot in the Fair Work Act about people not being casual, but at the end of the day, if the employee is making a choice that I would rather be casual, and you've got that in writing and we've not coerced them into doing it, it's just what works for them and their life, then we can absolutely have people working casually within our organisation, even if they don't necessarily meet the definition of it. You might consider looking at things like job sharing. So if somebody wants to, when people are advertising roles, I'll often say to them, don't box a job in as being a full-time or a part-time job. If you say it's full-time, you might actually miss out on some really quality candidates that are looking for part-time work. And you might come across two of those people, and you might look at that job sharing arrangement within your organisation, which has awesome benefits, because if you've got two people doing the same job, then if somebody's on holidays or they're sick, then you might have some flexibility to be able to, sub them in for each other. You might look at flexible rostering. I have read of examples where some organisations just put up a blank roster and people just put their names next to them. I feel like that would be like herding a bunch of cats. But looking at where you can build some flexibility into your rostering. It was something that happened in hospitality. Naturally, I spent many years working in the hospitality industry, and we had a not available book. So if there were particular things that you committed to, and you wanted some days off, then you would just put your days off in the book and people would roster around those. Some obvious exceptions being things like New Year's Eve and Easter and those sorts of things when everybody wants time off. The traditional working from home, there's often concerns around working from home. I don't personally work from home because I know that I am far less productive at home. I'll find many other jobs to do other than my actual job. So I like to come to the office. But if we're concerned about people's productivity, then we just sort of need to be thinking about what do we expect that person to achieve when they're working from home? Like, is it an output-based versus time-based? And yes, in some circumstances, it's absolutely, we need somebody to be answering the phones or greeting people or doing whatever we need them to do from, a certain period of time. But if it isn't a customer-facing role, then there's no real reason why we couldn't be saying to somebody, look, this is what I'd like you to achieve this week. And if that person gets all of those jobs done and it takes less time than what it would in the office, then great. So instead of measuring people on hours worked, we're actually measuring them on the outputs that they're achieving. So there are a lot of ways around some of the concerns from working from home. We've got really good working from home checklists if workplace health and safety and ergonomics is a concern. And I know lots of organisations that actually set people up with a home office so that they can have that flexibility. You can look at purchasing extra paid leave. So people might be banking some of their pay and, giving themselves 8 weeks leave. This is something that happens quite often in government, not necessarily something we see a lot of in the private sector, but there's certainly ways and means that people can do that. I would absolutely want a written agreement if I was going to be doing something like that, though, so it's very clear what the arrangement is. Unpaid leave or leave without pay is also another option if people have got some things going on or changes to their circumstances, that we might be able to allow them to take, regular unpaid leave or leave without pay until such time as they can return to their normal hours. Taking RDOs as a couple of half days instead of a full day, if that's something you do, which feeds into that sort of time off in lieu. So great way to avoid paying overtime if people want to bank some of the time that they do over their ordinary hours as time in lieu. There are some considerations in that. So different modern awards will have different requirements. One of the things we have to be careful of is where people are accruing toil or time off in lieu, is that a lot of awards will state that that employee can claim that money back instead of taking the time off, and we need to pay them. So just being conscious that there could be a cash flow implication for banking a lot of time in lieu. And I guess flex time is a similar kind of circumstance. So I just want to have some a good agreement around that so that it's clear what the expectations are. And then the last one is around that sort of gradual increase or decrease in work hours. So you might have somebody that's returning to work from, an illness or from parental leave or for an extended break, and they might be looking to gradually increase their hours, but you also might have people that might be looking to retire or scale back how much they're working, and so we might look to decrease their work hours. If you've got somebody that is looking at retirement and wanting to do that, it's a great way to get some knowledge transfer before they leave, because often if somebody's gone from full-time to leaving the organisation, we don't replace them until they've gone. but allowing them to taper off their working hours over a few months or a year or something is a really good way to bring somebody else into that role and start to transition the existing person out and the new person in, and have some handover, which is always nice. So that's by no means an exhaustive list. You know, I know workplaces that allow their, you know, people's kids to be dropped off, you know, on the school bus, and the kids are allowed to hang out in the workplace until mum or dad have finished work. You know, if somebody comes to you with a request for flexible work, it's really about looking at how we can accommodate it, or find some sort of compromise that might work for everybody. So some practical tips when we're thinking about flexible working arrangements, and people making requests for those, is recognising that different people will have different needs. So because you say yes to one person does not necessarily mean everybody else in the workplace is going to be asking for the same thing. And that's one of the reasons why some employers will just say no to everything, because it's like, well, if I give it to one person, I have to give it to everybody else. And I don't want to encourage a first in, best dressed kind of workplace culture. So when we are thinking about approving things, could we offer this to other people? Yes, no, maybe. Obviously, if everybody wants to have Friday off, that's probably not going to be overly conducive if you've got customers or clients that are expecting that the organisation will be open on a Friday. So you might look at some sort of rostering arrangement where, you know, people get every third or fourth Friday off, or whatever it might be. So trying to recognise those different needs and having really open conversations with people. So if we have got concerns about particular flexible working arrangements, share those concerns with that employee. I'm really worried about this because of, you know, our, you know, workload, or because of the impact on other people in the team, or whatever your actual concerns are, so that you can kind of workshop through it together, and looking for different solutions to some of those potential barriers to being able to provide flexibility in the workplace. So it might not be exactly what the employee wants, but maybe we can find a compromise that might suit their needs. And if we're really not sure about it, but, you know, there's not a definite no, then let's look at trialing something for a fixed period of time, and that might be 3 or 6 months, and you're quite within your rights to do that, but just making sure that that's transparent for the people or the person who's looking for that flexibility, because the things you might be worried about, consequences, they may not actually eventuate, or they might, and then you can sort of go back to the drawing board. So, you know, it can create a little bit of extra work for us, but there are some really good benefits. There's a lot of research that shows that businesses or organisations that provide flexible working arrangements have a workforce that have much higher levels of job satisfaction. And that high level of job satisfaction increases people's engagement. It increases their, you know, discretionary effort in the workplace, you know, just how they feel about their workplace generally, and how they might talk about their workplace to other people. It helps reduce people's stress, particularly if the flexibility is around trying to balance our, you know, work life and all of the other things that happen outside of work. You know, the natural thought process is about, you know, family commitments or caring commitments, but sometimes people have volunteering obligations, or, you know, they have hobbies and things that they like to be able to engage in, which helps de-stress them and makes them more ready to come back to work. And the job satisfaction, reduced stress, you know, that just generally has a flow-on effect to lower absenteeism rates. It starts to reduce down those people that might wake up in the morning and go, I really can't be bothered going to work today. But if we feel like our workplace is somewhere that cares about us and accommodates our needs, we're much more likely to, you know, jump out of bed and have a shower and go to work, no matter how much the temptation might be to lay in bed for the day and watch Netflix or something along those lines. We tend to see increased productivity. So people, you know, working harder, it's that discretionary effort I was talking about. And then you start to build a reputation in your industry sector or in your region as being a workplace that looks after their people, which means that it's much easier for you to be able to attract and retain skilled and the good staff that you're looking for. Most organisations I work with, it doesn't matter what industry, we all know the employers that we want to work for in our industry, and we know the employers that we probably don't really want to go and work for. And you definitely want to be one of those ones that people go, yeah, I'd like to work for them. They sound like a really good place to work. So there's lots of benefits. Sometimes if people are working less hours, it can also be less wage costs for your business if you can kind of cover what they're doing without necessarily having to replace them with somebody else. But if you're seeing increased productivity and job satisfaction, then you'll actually see an impact on your bottom line as well. I might just stop there for a minute and just see if anybody's got any questions and make sure I haven't got anybody sitting in the waiting room. No. Any questions so far? Anybody got any other flexible working arrangements that you'd like to share? Or you can save it until afterwards, so you're not giving away all your trade secrets.
We do feel quite challenged with requirements for, especially our client-facing roles, that are really customer, focused. So that, and a lot of the work we do is outreach. So it makes it really challenging to make those accommodations, and obviously the start and finish times. We can amend that to be flexible around people's family life and other commitments. But yeah, I guess for us, it's that the majority of the work we do is with clients. So it's really challenging to try and navigate that.
Absolutely. And look, that's one of those situations where consultation is really critical as well, to be able to say, look, we'd love to be able to let everybody start and finish when they want, work from home and all of those sorts of things. But, meeting the client needs is probably going to be a little bit challenging if we're all working from home in our pajamas, and, saying what sort of things can we do within the parameters of what we know we need to do, that would provide you with some of that flexibility. And, it's always, every industry and every organisation has its own challenges when it comes to that workplace flexibility. We've got people who have to be here from 8:30 till 4 because we need somebody to answer the phone or answer the door if there's somebody here. But we try and sort of say, okay, well, if that person wants to go early or start late or have that day off, then who can we sub in? But that's not always a possibility either, particularly when you're providing outreach services. It's a bit of a not negotiable. But I'd like to think,
is.
Yeah.
We've definitely looked at different strategies, like, accommodating the needs of actually ensuring they've got that downtime and that admin focus, and like setting aside that so that it isn't, you've got that opportunity to still have that, like you said, that's the consultation piece. So what are you kind of mostly struggling with? And okay, cool, let's look at that schedule and bring you out of outreach for certain set periods so you've got that opportunity to do your admin work. That's office space, and like trying to schedule it to kind of appease that. I never get a chance because I'm always out on the road, and that makes you feel overburdened. And just kind of like really nutting down what the issues are to really resolve. But there's definitely some really good suggestions on your list. So.
And I think that that's a really good example of, we hear that a lot in customer facing roles, but there isn't time between the customers or the clients to be able to get the work done. And that's one of those great opportunities where it is that little bit of output based versus time based. It's like, well, if you've met with all of your clients and you want to go home and do your paperwork, then that's fine, as long as that paperwork's done by whatever the deadline is expected. And so, we've got a few organisations that have people working from home, and they're like, oh, well, what if they're doing work of a night time or of a weekend? And it's like, well, that's their choice to do it, as long as you're clear to say, we don't expect you to work outside of your rostered hours. But if you've finished visiting all of your clients and done all your outreach and it's 2:00 in the afternoon and we're paying you till 4:30, if you want to go home, we don't mind. You can go home, go pick your kids up from school, or go to a Pilates class, or go horse riding, or a basket weaving class. And if you choose to do that work at 7:00 at night, once you've had your dinner and done your fun things, that's perfectly fine with us. But please don't expect us to pay you overtime or, penalty rates because you're working outside of your standard hours. Oh, here we go. We've got a suggestion from Amanda. 2 questions we find useful. What can we do to help you flourish? And what can you do to help the business flourish? Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Nice and simple. And sometimes people come up with the best ideas. Like, as managers or leaders, we often feel like it's our job to come up with the solutions to the problems. But sometimes just some really pointed questions like that can give us some, absolutely. It's a two-way street. Can give us some great suggestions, and you might sort of massage some of the things people come up with to make it work for your organisation. But great questions to ask. Yeah, nice. Excellent. All right. So let's have a quick look at some Fair Work Act requirements around this. Now I've just got to go back this way. So effectively anyone can request flexible working arrangements. Big fan of having that conversation in the recruitment process if you're hiring people around their expectations for this stuff. Because you don't want to get somebody into the organisation that, you know, has expectations that you can't meet. But it's also a great way to sell your organisation if you do have some flexibility options for people as well. So anyone can request it, but certain employees have a legal entitlement to request flexible working arrangements. So the first rule is they need to have been working with you for 12 months. And there's some particular circumstances where people who have worked for us for 12 months, if they are pregnant, if they're a parent or someone who has a responsibility for a school-aged child or younger, if they're a carer, so recognised within the Care Recognition Act, not just, you know, I don't want to leave my husband alone at home because he gets into mischief, but we kind of need to have some sort of formal carer, a person with a disability, somebody aged 55 or older, which is interesting, it's kind of ageist, but anyway, somebody experiencing family and domestic violence, or somebody that needs to provide care or support to an immediate family member or someone they live with because they're experiencing family and domestic violence. So those groups of people have that legal entitlement to request, not to say that anybody else can't request. If they want to, then they can absolutely do that. But the way that we deal with these groups of people is a little bit different in terms of how we need to respond. So there's some considerations, and I've taken these actually off the Fair Work website. There's some really great resources around flexible working arrangements on the Fair Work website. Don't go to the homepage though, just Google flexible working arrangements Fair Work, because it'll take you straight to where you need to go. And so when we get a request, the first thing we should be looking at, is this a request that falls under the Fair Work Act? Are there flexible working arrangement terms in the award, employment contract or workplace policies that might apply to that employee? What are their duties? Are some of those duties required to be done at set times and locations? So things like outreach work, or, you know, being on reception, or being front of house to serve customers. Who do they interact with in their normal course of work, and would the proposed arrangement actually impact those interactions? Do we have any technology solutions that can help? So one of the best things that we got after COVID was a phone system that we can answer from anywhere. So when we go off and have our Christmas lunch, everybody can come on the Christmas lunch and we take turns answering the phone when it rings. But yeah, so using technology where we can, Teams has been a really great tool for that as well, being able to message people wherever we are. A really important consideration is, why is the employee actually requesting this new arrangement? So what's happening for them that's resulted in them needing some more flexibility in their working arrangements? And what would be the consequences if we said no to that? So is that going to have a really significant impact on the employee? Or is it just that I'd like to head off camping on a Friday instead of a Saturday, so can I just start finishing work at lunchtime on a Friday? Obviously, the consequences of saying no to that are a bit different to somebody that's, you know, I don't know, I've lost my babysitter, or the person that picks my child up, and I really need to get them from school because there isn't a bus, or whatever it might be. So they're considerations that are actually suggested on the Fair Work website that we would consider when somebody is requesting some flexible working arrangements. So there's some rules about how we need to respond to those requests. You have 21 days to respond, and the response must be in writing. If you're going to refuse, you need to have reasonable grounds, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those reasonable grounds are in a minute. And before you can refuse any request, you need to discuss that with the employee before you would write to them to refuse it. So effectively, if somebody requests this, you can't just turn around and say no. You need to actually have a conversation with them. And as I said earlier, thinking about the consequences of refusing that request, what is that? What are they for that employee? And there is a requirement that employers are genuinely need to try and reach an agreement with the employee for some alternative arrangements before we would refuse any request for flexible work. So the reasonable grounds include things like the cost. So if that person's, I don't know, asking for a significant amount of time off, and it would mean that you would have to employ somebody else, then potentially that might be too costly. What is the impact on other people in your organisation? Or what is the impact if we did offer that flexible working arrangements? Do the people in our team actually have the capacity to make changes to accommodate those? So, you know, if, for example, I don't know, the person that mans our reception requested to work from home for 3 months because of whatever reason, what's the impact on other people in the organisation? Do we have other people that are here all the time that can do that? Or would that mean that people needed to change their workload or work arrangements and that they can't do that to accommodate that need? Or that might lead to a loss of productivity or impact on customer service. So Sam, your example of people doing outreach work, if somebody was requesting to work from home permanently or all the time, there's a pretty significant impact if there's somebody that needs to be out in the community undertaking their work. So we would have reasonable grounds to go, well, we can't give you that, but let's talk about what we could potentially accommodate based on the organisation needs and making sure that we're still delivering what we need to deliver as an organisation. I would be looking to quantify any of these. So you're probably aware, but if you're not, if you say no to something, the employee actually has the right to go to Fair Work and dispute that. So having a really good business case for why you can't do something is a really good position to be in case it is, I guess, disputed. But it also helps with the employee to be able to articulate to the employee why it's either too costly, it's not practical, we don't have capacity to support that, or it's going to impact on our customer service or business efficiency, and quantifying that for them, because then, a reasonable person will go, oh, okay, then I can see that. What if we did this instead? But a blanket no will not get you very far. So as I've said, it's about having a conversation with why they need this flexibility, what options we do have available. So I can't do that, but I could potentially do this. Pretty critical and very important in terms of not losing that employee, because if we're not talking to them about it, then they don't really understand why we're saying no. And if they don't understand why we're saying no, they might just assume we're saying no just because we've been difficult or we don't want to accommodate their needs, not because there's a business reason why. And we may lose good people because there might be another workplace that's willing to offer them that flexibility. We have somebody working for us who is an incredible employee, and being a not-for-profit, we don't have the ability to pay jag loads of money, which I'm sure some of you would relate to. So we provide a truckload of flexibility to that person. I'll often look in their diary and they'll be at the PT, or they'll be at the hairdresser, or they'll be at a swimming lesson, or they'll be doing this. But their output is amazing. We never have somebody ring up and go, I can't get hold of this person, or this person hasn't done what they said they were going to do. And they've been approached by many of our members who are like, do you want to come and work for us? We'll give you this much money. And this person consistently says to me, I won't leave because you give me all of the flexibility that I need. And it doesn't matter what someone's paying me, because I know that when I start getting paid that much money, they're not going to give me the flexibility that I'm looking for. So we kind of get that really real-time feedback as to how valuable that is. And I've been here for 10 years because I really like the fact that, there is a level of flexibility, and you don't know you're going to get that anywhere else. So that consultation, absolutely critical, and hopefully it will help you find a solution. So before we would refuse, you actually legally, according to the Fair Work Act, need to meet with that employee and discuss and consider different alternatives. And then we would follow that meeting up in writing with whatever we've discussed and what we might have decided on, and trying to find some sort of compromise that works for the business and the employee. So go back to the example we were talking about, Sam, with that, yes, you've got to be out and you have to be, physically out doing your job. But potentially we can give you some flexibility with the admin side of your job to be able to, either quarantine some time for you to do that in the office, or maybe letting you do that from home at a time that suits you. The consequences of refusal is also something that we need to take into consideration. And again, it's about trying to find that balance, because the consequences of refusal might be really significant for the employee. But if what they're asking for is, really costly or impractical, or we don't have capacity to accommodate it, the consequences of approving it might also be quite significant for the business. So it's really about trying to find a happy medium. And that's where that consultation piece can be really important. And sometimes if it's a short-term issue, we might let somebody take some leave without pay, or we might, let them use some of their annual leave, or, there's a whole range of things that we might be able to do, particularly for some of those short-term requests. Or if you're not sure what the impact's going to be, but you're open to it and you think you might be able to accommodate it, put a trial in place. 3 or 6 months, could be longer, could be shorter. It really depends. You might even just put it in place for a couple of weeks and see how it's working. And then come back and tweak the arrangement to address any issues that might have popped up from it. And as I said before, if you refuse and the employee is not happy with that, they can go to the Fair Work Commission, who will in the first instance try and conciliate an outcome. If they can't do that, then it'll go to mediation. If we still haven't got an outcome, the Fair Work Commission will arbitrate, and they will tell you what you need to do in terms of what sort of flexibility you need to provide. So nobody really wants to go down that path. It's not great for your ongoing working relationship. We've seen that a few times with unfair dismissals where employees have been reinstated. Generally, that employment relationship does not last for very long, because once somebody's taken an organisation to Fair Work, it does sort of put a bit of a dampener on our friendship. And so, if we can prevent it from getting to that point just by having good communication and explaining why we can't do things, I'd strongly recommend that approach as opposed to having to deal with the Fair Work Commission. Having said that, if you have a really strong business case, then perhaps it would be resolved at that conciliation, because you can demonstrate that the cost to the business is too much, or that the business doesn't have capacity, or this person is actually in a customer service role, therefore they need to be physically present at work during these hours. So some workplace documentation requirements or suggestions, actually, not necessarily a requirement. You might consider having a flexible working arrangement policy and or procedure. And the policy document templates, you can download them off Fair Work. We've got some templates, but that process is pretty important for managers or supervisors in your organisation, so they know what they need to do when they get a request. If people aren't aware of the obligations to actually go through a process, you might inadvertently find yourself in trouble with Fair Work when you could have kind of avoided it just by having a bit of a process for how we deal with requests. You might have a form or a template that you provide to your staff when they're making requests, so that you get all of the information that you need, not just a random verbal request or an email. Giving them a bit of a template can actually help draw out all the information you need to make an informed decision. There's another little gift in all modern awards, which is an individual flexibility arrangement. So workplace flexibility can work 2 ways. So you might have employees requesting it, but as an organisation, you might also be looking for a little bit of flexibility. We're using a lot of these now with the new definition of casual. So where businesses are employing people and they don't meet the new definition of casual because they're employing them for the long term. So I'm hiring you, and I'm not just hiring you for the summer season or to cover somebody while they're on leave. I actually want to keep you in my business. And most awards do not have much flexibility when it comes to permanent part-time work. So you have to guarantee them a certain number of hours. We're helping businesses draft individual flexibility agreements or arrangements to get around that. So we guarantee you a minimum of 20 hours a week, but we might have some more work every now and then. And we'd like to offer you that work, but we'd like you to do that at ordinary rates up to 38 hours a week. Once you hit over 38, you'll be on overtime. And for some people that works because it allows them to earn a little bit of extra money, but the business isn't necessarily paying for a truckload of overtime where there's some fluctuations in the hours. I will give you a little bit more information about those in a minute. And you can have some templates for responding to flexible working arrangements. So when I send you this presentation, I'll send you the link to some of the resources that I found on the Fair Work website. There's some great instructional checklists and templates that you can use. And if you want to make sure that you're taking the most risk-adverse process path to respond to some of this stuff, if you use Fair Work templates and anything goes a little bit pear-shaped, you'll already have some brownie points because you've been using some of the resources that they've provided. So every modern award has provisions for individual flexibility arrangements, and most enterprise agreements would have some sort of provision. If you operate under an enterprise agreement and you don't have a flexibility provision, the Fair Work National Employment Standard provisions would apply. But they can be great to make alternative arrangements that suit the needs of the employer and the employee. The only thing they can't do is reduce or remove an employee's entitlements. So the agreement still needs to meet the boot in that the employee is still better off overall than what they would be under award conditions or enterprise agreement conditions. But it's about building in some flexibility. So if we're going to use an IFA, the things that we can use individual flexibility arrangement for is when we perform work. So if you've got people that are doing work out of hours from home, then you might have an individual flexibility arrangement that spells that out. It might be for the payment of overtime. So we would be capturing things like time off in lieu or flex time in an individual flexibility arrangement so that everybody's clear on how that works. Same with penalty rates, any type of allowances or leave loading. So we can kind of have a bit of an arrangement for, we might be giving them something in lieu of us paying them something. Some other requirements for an individual flexibility arrangement, we can't have one in place before the employee starts. I was working with an organisation, and they were trying to give a new employee an employment contract to employ them for the first time and an individual flexibility arrangement at the same time. It doesn't work like that, and it also looks a bit dodgy to the employee because we're saying, here's your employment agreement. Oh, but we'd like to do these things over here as well. You know, we have to let them start working for us before we would introduce an individual flexibility arrangement. Either party can initiate it, so it can be the employer or it could be the employee. I'd suggest that the vast majority of employees in our workplaces probably are not overly familiar with an individual flexibility arrangement, unless there's somebody that's had a fair bit to do with industrial relations or the Fair Work Act in the past. We cannot coerce somebody or threaten somebody to sign that individual flexibility arrangement. It needs to be genuinely entered into by both parties. I had an example of this the other day. We drafted one up for a business to give a bit of flexibility with the part-time arrangements. The employee said to the employer when they read it, they said, I don't want to work extra hours without getting overtime, even though they're only working 20 hours a week. And the employer said to me, well, what do? I said, well, you give them part-time work and you don't enter into the agreement. So they just have to work the hours for which they're contracted for. If you need them to work over their 20 hours a week, then you'll need to pay them overtime. But naturally, the business is probably going to use a casual or an employee that has got an individual flexibility arrangement that isn't going to cost them overtime. So, yeah, so we can't force somebody to do it. You need to make sure you give your employee a copy of this in writing because in that agreement, it will talk about which terms of the award you're varying and what you're varying them to. If you don't make it properly, it probably still applies, but you might get a fine. You'd be pretty unlucky, I would imagine. So there are some requirements around that. Now I'm just going to stop if I can work out how to stop sharing the screen. If you've been to one of these before, you know this is where I do my plug for the Employer of Choice Assist program. If you need some help with any of this stuff, we are more than able to assist. If you have 20 or less full-time equivalent employees, we can do that for you at absolutely no cost until the end of the financial year. Or if you know anybody that's running a business that would be eligible, we can help them with all of these sorts of things. But I'm going to just stop recording now so that we can have a chat.